Hi, I'd like to welcome everybody to an episode of my podcast called Yo Soy. You can find us everywhere on all podcasts, all platforms. And we'll make sure that if you go to our links, you can find where you can donate to our movement, I guess. I was recently just asked, hold on, let me turn off that thing. Sorry, I had some things that shouldn't be loaded in the background. Let me get rid of those. I was recently just asked, what am I trying to do with my movement here at Yo Soy? I call it a movement only because I'm very concerned about the future of Mexico and obviously what's happening in the United States. So if I would have to pick a movement, the movement is to bring back the strength of the Mexican voter, both in the United States and in Mexico. Mexico has a very curious voting system. In fact, several years back, 5 presidents ago, it actually was stolen just like it was here in the United States. At 5 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, the president mysteriously got voted in through illegal votes that everybody in the country has come to the knowledge that, yes, it was illegal. So in this day, I really am concerned about computers and computers interjection into the voting system and the magical way that these computers, through fuzzy logic, create bad votes or votes that are illegal. So, with that being said, I talk about it in many other videos that I've done, talking about how this happens, and we're not going to talk about it today. What we're going to talk about today is how can we make Mexicans on both sides in the United States, meaning north of the United States and south of the United States, and inside the United States, be part of the voting process and making sure we get represented. As I said before, in 1970, was it till 1970 until Richard Nixon actually gave us the ability to vote as a Mexican body? Unfortunately, in 1980, that was further degraded by the use of calling us Latinos. Now it's further degraded by calling us Latinx. So here we have a constant breakdown where Latinos aren't being equally represented in the government because they're being split off amongst groups that then again get divided even further. In this case, Mexicans, who I believe are 90% of the total voter population called Latino, are not getting their equal representation. Today, we have this big phenomenon going on with illegal immigration going across the border, a wall, no wall, people sent into Martha's Vineyards, people sent to Democrat states. I have a friend who's a liberal, and he says to me, "You're ridiculous, Mike." And I said, wait a second. First of all, Florida is not a state that receives illegal aliens except from Cuba. These guys came from Venezuela, not through the waters, but they were sent there via Texas. So I had to explain to him that I actually go to McAllen, Texas a lot in order to go up to Dallas, where I actually do some work and have a project. So I saw the fact that I can get into McAllen, Texas at 7 o'clock in the morning, but I cannot even get a bus into Dallas until 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the morning because of the flow of migrants that are coming from the Catholic Church services across the street. Now, I'm a humanitarian. I really believe in strength of humanitarianism and helping people who are poor and give them new opportunities. Hey, that's what I do here in Mexico all the time, Mexico City. But the reality is this. I also believe in the rule of law. So I don't find that situation actually very comfortable. In fact, I find it very uncomfortable. People talk about, oh, the reason why immigration hasn't happened over the last 4 or 5 US presidents is because they want cheap labor. No, I do not believe that's the reason why it hasn't happened. I believe the reason why it hasn't happened is because the laws have not given us the power to make a change. What does that mean? That means the voting laws. It wasn't until 1970, like I said, that Mexicans, people who were actually living in Mexico before it became the United States, before the states became what before they were, I guess they called them, the states were called, I forget what they're called right now. Okay, they weren't quite states yet. New Mexico is a classic example. So what I'm getting at is that they're territories. So these states only became states in 1914. In 1911, I believe it is the two states, Arizona and New Mexico, where both my families came from. So what that means is Mexicans were always in the United States. Like I said before, in 1930, when there actually was an immigration survey done called the census, they stopped counting Mexicans and start calling us something else. At the time, they called us Chicanos. Then they start calling us nothing. Okay. But they didn't count us. It wasn't until 1970. Well, that created an imbalance of power for people who were living in those areas, meaning California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Colorado. All those states were hugely Mexican by birth. They were there for since 1800s. So we have to remember how we got here and why we don't have the power to make change. It's through voting, because voting determines the balance of power. Right now, we have an exciting time where Mexico has a leader for only 2 more years. Only 2 more years, because a lot of liberals are trying to come in and take his place. They're globalists. We can't let that happen. What we have to do is we have to work hard and get the Mexicans in the United States to vote for Mexicans that are truly caring about the Mexican people. The reason why they left in the first place. The reason why a lot of Mexicans left is not to leave their people. They look for greater opportunity. Because of the presidents in the past, they said corrupt. Now, corrupt is a big word, because obviously the United States is very corrupt right now. So I'm not going to say that either one's better or the other. I'm going to say they're equal. In fact, I'm going to say the United States is more corrupt because they're lying about it. At least in Mexico, I was told once, a friend of mine said, his family is part of the PRA party. He says, "Show how this works, Mike." I said, "How does this work?" How this works is, once we get into power, once we become senators and representatives in the government, that all of our family succeeds. I said, "What?" "Yes, then we can hire each other and get money and make some money. And then the next time it happens, when we get out of office, then boom, we get kicked out, and we hope we had enough money to survive. And we have enough land or enough businesses, or we did well enough that we can go to the United States." Once again, that is the imbalance of power done to create power by the rich. That way they propagate their poorness. The same reason I kept saying to myself, why is our current mayor building a train of all things? We need water in Mexico City. We need better transportation amongst the city people from place to place. We need better infrastructure so that new up and coming young people, like my assistant, who's only 23 years old, like he can actually move into a nice apartment and feel the power of upward mobility. That's not what the government wants. But that's the same thing happened in the United States. So let's take a lesson from a bad lesson. Okay. Because when you start building infrastructure so much that you start using all the tax dollars, and you take part of that tax dollars and you're giving it to your family and friends to do infrastructure, to do projects, then you know what happens? 30% of it goes to the actual project. Expenses increase. So what happens is government is perpetuating its ability not to help the poor. I described rather quickly, broadly, what's going on. So let's talk about how we can become part of the great movement that I see it's happening in Mexico. I don't really care about the United States right now. The United States has its own problems. They have a leader, and there's a leader who's willing to help them, and it worked before, and maybe he'll come back in power. Who knows? But the problem is the base is messed up in the United States, all the way from the judicial system, all the way to the presidential, and how they get there and who gets there. We don't need that. In fact, to make the movement even better, let me take away this phone call. To make that even better, the way we can actually move forward is by participating in what's being allowed us to do today. Sadly, the reason why the Sheinbaums in Mexico City don't want to have education of the young increase is because then they will do what they tell them. They will listen to the headlines, read the headlines if they can read them. Fascinating story. I used to always wonder why, when I would go to